Hello and welcome back to the lab. Today we have nothing on the bench, which means it's Q&A time with the wizard again. I have been getting a lot of questions in the comments that have alluded to when I do a repair. I show the board pre-repair, well, pre-capacitor replacement and then post-capacitor replacement. Clean up my bench here so I don't stab a finger. And it seems to be there's a misconception of there's some secret sauce that happens when the camera's off when I'm doing a capacitor replacement. This is not the case. I am truly just replacing the capacitors. You guys see the first power on when I flip the button on the supply, and if I get a capacitor in wrong, it's going to smoke out the side of the unit. So there is nothing other than capacitor replacement that goes on behind the camera when the camera's off. Now, if you guys would like to see more of the capacitor replacement, let me know. I can definitely show running a soldering iron. It's something I have a reasonable amount of experience in doing. But we're also going to talk about the soldering irons today and some of the secret sauce. One of the reasons people send gear into the lab is not because there's any kind of special magic in cleaning the equipment or anything like that. The special magic is actually right here. Not everyone has access to a DC and AC standard as well. This is where my 7.5 digit meter's hiding. If anybody, it's hooked up, it works, it's on. But so this is the calibration stack. As it's gonna boot and make a liar of me, but that's okay. So I ran out of space on the equipment tower, so I had to move the 7.5 down here. And that's the problem, is working on these PG 506s, things like that. This is calibration gear. So not a lot of people have a 7.5 digit meter, a DC reference standard, an AC reference standard in their lab. So that causes some of my customers a problem, because if they're more than capable of finding the fault in the device, they don't have the equipment available to them to recheck in the device and make sure that the alignment hasn't changed. And especially with with a PG 506, if I remember correctly, it needs a 0.025% DC accuracy for that one. So I have to use the DMM 7500. The 6500 is not good enough. So to get access to this, plus the rubidium standard, is why some of my customers opt to send their equipment in versus fix it at home, because they're more than capable of fixing it in their labs. They're just not capable of doing the alignment because they don't have the equipment. The next question I get is, do you have an ESR meter? Yes, I do. It's right here. This is the best ESR meter I have in the lab at the moment, and it's the best one I have found for the price. I do want to get some other ESR meters to test at higher frequencies, but their cost gets stupid fast. I was looking at some Keithley equipment, and the Keithley equipment was mid 5 figures, so it gets real dumb once you get out of the handheld size and into the bench size. So if you're in the market for an ESR meter, definitely take a look at this one. It is still sold. You can buy it new. And I made these clips for it, so I did not... these are not available to purchase. You buy an extra... This has 2 really short alligator clips coming off of it. Buy an extra one of these TL21s, and you can add these clips to it. It does do full 4-wire measurement, but there's a little bit of servicing you have to do. These clips they used to have BNC ends on them, and I converted it over to use with the DE5000. Okay, if there are any secret weapons in the lab, it's probably this corner right here. This is the soldering setup that I've been running very shortly before the channel started. Ooh. Going back, I can't remember. I don't remember if I had an FM203 when the channel started or not. Well, I took a look at the very first video I ever made, which was repairing a joystick, and I was using this handpiece. I recognize it in the video, so yep, I had an FM203 when I started the channel. Prior to that, I was using a Weller station. Dave from the EV blog did a video where his Weller smoked out the power transformer, and then I found out that the Weller wasn't fused on the input. I did not like that design decision, and I had also decided that I wanted to upgrade to the newer style of soldering iron, which has this style tip, which we'll look at here in short order. I know Lewis is a huge fan of the integrated heat cartridges, and to be perfectly honest, I am too. I've actually given away all of my old style irons and tips to different technicians. They are gone. They've been long gone. If I still had them now, I would give them away on the channel, but I do not. So when it comes to soldering irons, the bare minimum that anybody should try to use would be a good Weller station or a 888D. The 888D is very common, but it has the old style tips. So let's get into that. So on a soldering pencil, this distance tends to be pretty important. I believe it's called working distance if I remember correctly. Medcal has some of the shortest working distances out there. Heiko's not bad, and I went with the Heiko stuff. I didn't, when I started buying and decided to buy into the Heiko ecosystem, I didn't know about the Medcal stuff, and I do think the tip selection on the Heiko is a little bit better. So these tips are a lot longer than people are than you'd be used to, and the tip has the heating element, temperature sensor, and tip all in a cartridge. So when I replace this tip, I am replacing the heating element in the soldering iron, and I know some techs that aren't a fan of that. This heats up so much faster, regulates so much better, and gives me much more control over the soldering function that I don't mind replacing the heating element. This is the standard size Heiko iron. I do have the micro iron as well. I use the micro iron a little bit, but you can tell tip size difference. So we have the micro tip, we have the full size tip, and this is the bent micro tip. Here's the straight micro tip, and the funny thing is, this looks small, but that's a solder ball on the front of this tip. This tip's even smaller. So when I do some of the really small surface mount stuff, these micro tips come in handy, but I don't use these much in the day-to-day in the lab. What I do use, and actually you can tell which tips I use by how crusty the front ends are, because you can see I'm not even sure this tip's ever been in an iron. This tip I have needed to use on occasion. It's not even really discolored yet. This one I know has never been in an iron, but it's a micro point in the larger cartridge. So my favorite soldering iron tip for doing the work that I do around the lab is actually this T15 D08. So this looks like it's a conical tip, but it's actually not. I think you can just see the flash of the light in the tip. This is the smallest chisel tip they make. I also use this tip number, the T15. So T15 is the tip style. In this case, the JD08 is the number. So it's a D08 tip, but the J means it's bent, and the 8 is the size. So I use the curved bent tip a lot. I have needed on some of the older tech stuff where I've been working on those ceramic heat strips, I have needed a bigger chisel tip, and this is the T15 DL52, so I do use this on occasion. This is starting to get into the size for chassis work. If I need to solder something to a chassis, this can keep up. I really need to get a chassis iron. It is on the list to acquire, but I've had a line on a couple a few times and it hasn't panned out. But we have the XD15 as well, and this thing is humongous. This is great for chassis work when I have to bond something to a chassis. It's got a huge thermal mass on the front end and really heats up and does a great job soldering to the chassis. I bought a couple of extra of these handles, so the way you assemble one of these tips is they go in, it'll click, and then it just pops in and out of the iron. So if I need to change a tip on the fly, I can just pull it in and out of the iron and it's good to go. And I actually don't need a heat glove because the finger guard comes with the tip, and I don't need to change the finger guard, so I can just swap tips on the fly and not worry about it. The finger guard also keeps the tip off the bench to keep it from burning. I also have these tip stands, so when I put them back, they'll stand up and they won't catch anything on fire, melt any of the gear, do anything like that. With the finger guards on, the tip stands don't hold as many tips as normal, but I love these bases. They're weighted. I don't know if they'll fit any of the other iron cartridges, but it's a super heavy weight, and you get the idea. So really actually like these bases for holding the soldering iron tips. Now you'll also notice this one's kind of weird, that one's kind of weird, that one's kind of weird, and that one's kind of weird. I do have an N2 system in the lab that I did a video on. I think that was a 600 subscriber video. I decided to ramp up to some N2 soldering. I don't use the N2 gear much on customer equipment. It is available if people ask for it. I find it's not needed. Where I did get the N2 gear is for servicing some of the old tech equipment on that ceramic strip stuff, because the ceramic strip soldering needs a lead-free solder. So the N2 really makes the lead-free solder behave. I do use leaded solder in the lab. As a matter of fact, here's the roll that lives on the bench. MG Chemicals, yeah, 6337. Resin core solder. The important part of the solder is if you're still using 6040, flip over to 6337. The main difference is when 6337 is cooling, the 6040 has this plastic region where it's not completely frozen solid yet, and it's freezing, but it still moves and things like that. With the 6337, that transition from liquid joint to solid joint is very narrow and very quick. So take the heat away, you watch it freeze, it's done, it's not going to move. So you get a better joint with the 6337 than you do with the 6040 because there's less of a chance of it moving while it's cooling. So if anybody's working on the old tech ceramic strip stuff, I have found this solder right here from Kester, also a good brand of solder. 96.5 of tin. We have 3% silver and 0.5% copper. The 3% silver is what's critical on this. This was the highest silver content solder I could find, because in the ceramic strip stuff, if you don't use a silver bearing solder, you can break the silver to ceramic bond in the ceramic strip, and that U-joint, that saddle just pops out, and that's it. I mean, I'm not going to be able to replace those ceramic strips these days. So I have one shot to get it right, and I don't mind spending a little bit of money to make sure I have the proper tools. One other thing about the integrated cartridge soldering irons is these tips tend to be a lot thinner than the older style where you had the ceramic heater and the tip was a sleeve that went around it and there was a sleeve that went on top of that to hold everything together. So with this being a lot thinner, this lets me get in places where a older style soldering iron wouldn't. So extremely happy about that. The way the soldering iron stays set up in the lab is 650 degrees C, or so no, 650 degrees F, and that's about all I need. I rarely have to change it. If I do have to change it, I'm working on a very massive ground plane board. I might bump it up to 70 or 700 and go from there. I've never had to turn this iron on to full power, even for doing chassis work. Now, for doing chassis work, I get the much bigger tip, which gives me a lot bigger thermal mass, but it just works. It's a fantastic iron to use. I can't. It is a 70 watt, but it is very temperature controlled, so I get the power, and yeah, it just doesn't have trouble with joints. Really makes soldering pleasant. As a matter of fact, this is going to sound kind of weird. I actually enjoy soldering. It's not bad. My wife even likes making wiring harnesses with this iron. She'll sit down and do a wiring harness for a car radio or something like that. So she will even mess around with this because it's so pleasant to use. One of the other features that I really like about these soldering irons is they have a resting base. So as I put the iron in, I don't know if microphone's not going to pick it up, but you see how the base drops? It's actually pushing a switch that's in the back of the base here that's hooked up to the station, and it'll put the iron to sleep. So what happens is, well, we'll turn it on and I'll show you what happens. And we'll do this in real time. So this is dead cold. I've just been playing with it. Look how fast it's heating up. And done. It's ready to go. So I turn the there, man. So it's going to go to sleep here soon. Show you the front. So right now this one's blinking, so it's saying this is the side that's in use, the nitrogen side, because I have the nitrogen hooked up down here and I have the normal non-nitrogen on this side. So on the FM203, you get a 70 watt base and you get a single and dual side, that's S&D. So it's a 70 watt port and a 140 watt port. But if I pick up the other iron, it's ready to go. So I'm working and I leave it sit here. It's already gone to sleep, so the iron's cooling off. So what that allows is it extends the tip life. Ever since I've had this. So keep in mind, I used this iron in my very first YouTube video. I have never replaced a tip. I've bought more, but I've never had to replace a tip yet. It's never worn out, which is actually incredible now that I think about it. But I'll pick it up, move this on the camera so you can see it. So I'll pick it up. It's ready to go. Now I have it set for a pretty deep sleep because I turned the iron on and I'm working, looking at schematics, things like that. So it'll sleep down to about 350 degrees Fahrenheit. But when I pick it up, I just wait for the beep, and it's ready to solder again. So it heats up so fast. And this is all real time, too. This isn't sped up. There you go. Now, with all things, it is not all sunshine and rainbows. I bought this thing to go with my FM203, and this is one of the reasons why I did buy the FM203 station, is because I was hoping tweezers were going to be a thing, and I had really high hopes for these big tweezers. I had to do some really big joints, and I was expecting the two 70-watt irons were going to help me out significantly. You can tell by the discoloration on the iron tips, I have not used these much. Part of that problem is that they really don't want to stay together and grab the joint. So I am going to try the micro set of tweezers. I really hope the micro tweezers, I have a better experience with the micro tweezers than I do with these. I was not a fan of the parallel remover. I'm hoping I will be a fan of the micro tweezers. You guys will know because there are no sponsors to the lab. So what is on the bench is equipment that none of the equipment in the lab has been sponsored. I've paid full price for all of it, and it's just the stuff that I've picked for the lab and I use every day. Had high hopes for these and was kind of disappointed, but it is what it is, and we move on. So now, one tool that has not disappointed me and has been absolutely fantastic is next. This thing has been amazing. So this was the first real desolder tool that I've actually owned, and I will not be on a bench that doesn't have one of these, even if I have to pay for it myself. It is absolutely fantastic. I use this very often. The pump is good, the suction's good, it doesn't clog very much. When it does clog, you get a needle pin. Every tip comes with a needle pin of the same size. You just run it down and it goes all the way through to push whatever's in there out into the heating element to keep. There are some consumables with this. This is a ceramic filter to keep flux and everything out of the pump. There's even another filter on the back. These things, I usually get 2 cleanings of the barrel before I have to change the filter. They are relatively inexpensive, so don't mind doing that at all. There's the filter number for the Heiko part, A5044. And they come in a 10-pack for like $12. So get good amounts of use out of the filters. The gun is 140 watts, so it gets plenty hot, has lots of suction. So what this allows me to do is I can actually work on the top side of the board. So what happens is, especially if I have a really compact plug-in, so let's say, for example, I have a really compact multi-layer plug-in like this 7A26, and I need to replace some capacitors on this side of the board. Well, I don't have a lot of access from the back, so what I can do is I can use the normal iron. I can pull apart. So if I needed to replace, say, this resistor, I can get in there, pull the part, but I still have the problem of cleaning out the holes. Well, that's where this comes in. I can clean the holes from the top side of the board, and I don't have to go under the board to get at the pins. So I can service parts that are on the top side of the board without disassembling the unit, which is fantastic, especially working on 400 series scopes. God, if I had to take the motherboard out every time I had to replace a capacitor, it'd be awful because of how badly I have to tear down the scope. I would not do 400 series repair without a good desoldering tool. It's that critical. So the desoldering gun allows me to affords me a very large flexibility in how I replace components and service parts. So if there's any secret weapon in the lab, this guy's it. Now, if you look up the FR4101, you're just going to find this handpiece. It's the FR 410 is the gun, or is the whole iron. The 410 is the power unit. This is a 140 watt desoldering tool. Again, very temperature regulated. I can set the temperature, do all that stuff. So even though it's 140 watts, I'm not burning boards up. Very powerful suction. Pumps good. I did, actually, the desoldering tool does not have the weighted sleep feature. However, you'll notice under here, this can move. This is a speaker shock mount. The pump is so strong in this one that I had to put a speaker mount to isolate it from the bench so I could actually use this when it was on camera. Because it turned the bench into a speaker and all you heard was brrrr. Now that beep means it's ready to go. Let's see if you can see it shake on the camera. Here we go. Oh yeah. Now the other thing that's really nice about this one is this tells you how hard it's working. So this bar at the bottom is a suction meter. So what I'll do is I will clean, if I find the appropriate pin size. This is not it. I will clean out this tip. And you'll be able to see it drop. And I've used this so much. Now it's clogged and I can even tell by the sound. Yeah, it went down a little bit. How hard the pump's working, which tells me when I'm going to need to clean filters and things like that. I've had this for about 3 years. This is the final filter, so flux fumes don't get into the pump when you're soldering. And I'm getting close to needing to clean that one. I haven't had to change this one yet. This is the original. But to change this, you just pull this off, put another filter pad in there, and pop that back on. But you'll actually see when I hit the button, it pulls so much vacuum, this will move in. You can kind of see it moving there. So that's how much it's yanking on that joint. So really, really fantastic tool. Not cheap, though. There'll be sticker shock on that one, I'm sorry. Tip selection on the desoldering tool is actually pretty wide as well. The only tip that I've really had a problem with is this super large hole. This one tends to not stick around too long. I've already blown out the side of this one, so shave this off, make a different tip maybe. Not sure yet. One of the things that's really nice is this particular desolder tool has these long reach tips. So it's a very fine one, similar. It's the same diameter as the tip that I have in there right now. But the tip goes down into the board, so I can have the iron off the board if I need to do a really high density pin package, things like that. The drawback of these tips is there's not a lot of thermal mass here, so they cool off very quickly. They also clog very easily. When you're using one of these extended tips, you clean this a lot. My favorite tip so far for the desoldering tool is it's on, so I'm not going to touch it, but focus, come on, camera. There we go. Is that one right there. So it's the same diameter as this one, but it doesn't have as long, so it has much better thermal conductivity and thermal mass. I also have two more in the short ones. We have the smallest one, which I use often, a little bit bigger, really big. So these two are all right. Don't have much problems with these. Don't need to use them that much, although some of the capacitors that I need to change have some really beefy legs, and I need to up the pin size. Now, I have the old gun, so they have a quick change gun now that I'm thinking about upgrading to. Just haven't had the money to spend on it yet, and this one's been working fine. So changing the tips on that particular gun is a little harder than using one of the quick change guns. The quick change gun has 3 settings, and you just stick the heating element in there, do a quarter turn, pull it out, and you have a different tip on it. For those that don't like the gun style handpiece, they do make a pencil style handpiece. It is the FR 4100, I think. The 4101 is the gun style, the 4100 is the pencil style. So, and I do have an assortment of tips on hand for the desoldering tool if I need them. I have needed the spade lugs to do some chassis work once or twice, but that's rare. So I hope that demystified some of the secret sauce. If you would like to see more soldering and things like that, let me know. My goal is to preserve knowledge that I have gained during my career and also put it in a format where I can pass it on to the next generation. So if there's any secret sauce that I can help demystify, please ask questions in the comments. I read all the comments between every video. Like, subscribe to the video. That lets the algorithm know you guys like what you're seeing, and we'll show it to more people so we can get the word out. And the other thing is, I don't want to keep anything from you guys. So videos can be generated from comments. So please, please, please ask. If I get enough comments, there will be a dedicated video on the topic because it lets me know what you guys want to see. So with that, I will see everybody in the comments and in the next video. More is always on the way. And if there's anything else I can show, let me know.